Why are there no other studies into other forms of treatment? Less invasive, less risky treatments for gender dysphoria. I won't be satisfied until justice has been served for the harms that have been committed in the past. We don't affirm delusions in any other mental health presentation, but here, for some reason we do. We will fight it as far and as hard as we can.
Do you think it's possible to have any form of clinical trial that would be ethical? Hi everyone, the NHS is about to embark on a clinical trial for puberty blockers to see the benefits and the harms of, well, basically drugging kids out of puberty. Conducting a clinical trial was one of the key recommendations of the CAS review, but given how hardcore these drugs are, and that 98% of the kids that go on them will then go on to wrong sex hormones and potentially surgeries, this raises many questions. Is a trial like this just gonna open the door to more medical harm? And if there aren't any other ways to gather the evidence that they're looking for? I'll be discussing all these things with James Esses, who, together with Kira Bell, is planning a judicial review in case the trial actually gets going. Before we dive in, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thank you so much to everyone who's helped me hit 30k! Yay! Please like the video and leave a comment. If you don't know what to say, just say block the blockers! If you appreciate these conversations and would like to support my channel, you can do so on a monthly basis by joining my Patreon. Or if you want to be a bit more casual about it, you can send me some love via PayPal or by using Super Thanks here on YouTube. Okay, I'll start with a very brief overview of the pushback against puberty blockers in the UK, which goes back 20 years, and then I'll bring on James. Let's go. The first person to ring the alarm about the NHS prescribing blockers was Sue Evans back in 2005. At the time, they weren't given to anyone under 16, but this changed in 2011 when kids as young as 12 were put on them as part of a clinical trial known as the Early Intervention Study. Before the findings of this study were even known, in 2014 the age limit was dropped so kids as young as 9 could be put on blockers. Many other clinicians raised concerns, which led to the David Bell whistleblowing report in 2018, and by this time the media started picking up on it. In 2020, the National Institute for Healthcare and Excellence found that the evidence base for blockers is very low and likely to be biased. Later that year, the CAS review was commissioned, and Sue Evans helped Kira Bell and an anonymous mother to bring a judicial review to determine if children could actually consent to going on blockers. The High Court ruled that those under 16 are highly unlikely to be able to do so, but this was overturned the following year by the Court of Appeal, who ruled that it was up to clinicians to decide whether a child could consent or not. In March 2022, the interim CAS review report is published, and the NHS announces that Tavistock JITS will be closed. In March 2024, just before the publication of the final CAS review report, the NHS announces it will no longer prescribe puberty blockers for new patients unless it's part of a clinical trial. Tavistock JITS finally closes and regional hubs open instead. The Conservative government then temporarily bans the prescribing of blockers by private providers.
Today I want to set out my clear intention to introduce a banning order on puberty blockers with limited exceptions under Section 62 of the Medicines Act 1968.
In August, the NHS announces it will conduct a clinical trial due to start in early 2025. The new Labour government extends the temporary ban on private prescribing. The original ban is challenged in court, but is found to be lawful. West Streeting then turns it into an indefinite ban.
I am acting on the Commission's advice to put an indefinite order in place.
In January 2025, it is announced that the clinical trial will be funded to the tune of nearly £11 million. It's been a long road, but are we now at risk of losing all that progress? Let's bring on James. Hi everyone, I'm here with James Esses to talk about the puberty blockers trial that the NHS is planning. And I'm sure, James, you've got a lot to say about that.
As always, yeah, you won't be able to shut me up.
Okay, well, we've only got an hour. And there's two of us that won't stop talking. Right, so before we get into the details of the trial or what we know about the trial, I just wanted to have do a bit of an overview of where are we now anyway, because there are people who think that puberty blockers have been banned in the UK, but that's not actually the case, is it?
Well, they've been banned in sorts, but I increasingly believe that the whole thing's been a bit of a fudge, to be honest. I mean, when I first heard that the ban was taking place, I was euphoric about it. I thought, finally, this is the culmination of years of everyone persevering and trying to push for this. But then when you read between the lines, you see it's not quite as good as you think. So, for example, it's not a permanent ban, it's just an indefinite ban. And you read the wording in the government's announcement and they say that it's to be reviewed in 3 years. Well, that's not giving me a great deal of hope, to be honest with you, if it can be just kind of reversed as easily as that. We'll come on to the trial in a moment, which is the most concerning aspect of it. But children who are already on puberty blockers can still continue to receive them.
Exactly, yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me, because in the government's announcement, they this quote is very important. They said that puberty blockers present an unacceptable safety risk.
That prescribing puberty blockers to children for the purposes of gender dysphoria in the current prescribing environment represents, and I quote, an unacceptable safety risk.
And if it really is the case, then why would you allow any child to have them, irrespective of whether they've already been put on them? It should be cancelled and curtailed immediately.
Yeah, I'm with you. And there was a phrase that was used a lot is the NHS has stopped routinely prescribing puberty blockers.
Following the CAS review, the NHS ceased the routine use of puberty blockers to treat gender incongruence in children.
But they never actually routinely prescribed them because you couldn't get them from a local hospital or your family doctor. And even these kids at Tavistock GIDS weren't routinely put on them. I think it was only about 30% or something along those lines that were actually referred onto the blockers. So it's always this language that you have to look at, like, what are they actually saying and what do they actually mean? Because it sounded so good. And with West Streeting in Parliament going, this is a medical scandal.
It is a scandal that medicine was given to vulnerable young children without the proof that it is safe or effective.
And he's, green-lighting a trial. And Cass is as well, Hilary Cass herself. She recommended this in the Cass review. So when the Cass review first came out, and that's almost a year ago now, the final report, did you then have alarm bells ringing with some of the things in there and the language that was used?
Well, my overarching view is that the review was very important. It brought this into the public domain in a way that it hadn't been previously. It backed up a lot of what we had been saying all this time about the potential risks of this medicalization, about concerns amongst therapists and pressure being put on clinicians to affirm children, the impact on detransitioners and all the rest of it. So I think it was very important from that perspective. And it is, in the UK, it is the leading study. And it's directly led to the Tavistock being closed and now to this, at least for now, ban on puberty blockers. But it's not perfect. I was concerned by some of the language that was used in the report, because at times Cass was using, I think, kind of ideologically based language. And I understand where she was coming from. She didn't want to alienate people. She wanted to try and ensure that as many people read it as possible. But as a result of that, there was, I think, some degree of kind of pandering to some of what the other side say on this, which wasn't great. The fact that there was the recommendation of a trial at all, of course, was concerning, because, again, with the risks as they are, no child should be ingesting this medicine at all. And I was particularly concerned when, this is now a few months ago, when she, I think it was on the BBC, but during an interview, she said that potentially unlimited numbers of children could take part in this trial. And she wasn't saying that from a sense of shock. She was just saying it as if it was, matter of fact, no big deal. But to me, that was absolutely madness, because it's essentially a loophole around the entire ban if unlimited numbers of children take part in a trial. Anyway, it makes sense.
And then they're saying, we'll get onto this more in detail when we talk about the, what they announced about the trial. But they were saying, if the parents and the doctors agree. But then again, how quickly do they decide that? Because like you're a therapist, and working with someone in a therapy setting takes time. Like, first of all, you have to sort of get used to each other. The first couple of sessions, you don't actually get to work as such, on the big issues, because there's so much to explore. And I'd say it takes at least a good year, right, to really get to know your client and to be able to achieve something. So how quickly would they even be able to make those decisions? And we know what it was like at the Tavistock. They would maybe see them just a handful of times, maybe in 1 or 2 years, and put them on. It's like you need weekly sessions for at least a year, I'd say.
Well, I often hear from the other side when they're trying to rebut our arguments. They say this is nonsense that there's children, being given these puberty blockers, on a whim. I mean, they were never given them during the first consultation, as if that's as if that makes it all right. Then, I mean, it would be even more ludicrous than it currently is if they were handing these things out at the first consultation. The fact that they're handing them out on the second or third consultation doesn't make it that much better. At the end of the day, as you just said, I mean, I'm working with clients, including some vulnerable younger people at the moment, who are unhappy in their bodies and contemplating transitioning, all the rest of it. I mean, these are really personal, sensitive, complex areas, and you're right. It can take time just to even build up that therapeutic relationship of trust that they're comfortable enough to start opening up about how they're feeling in this space. Decent, explorative, potentially long-term therapy always should be a prerequisite to anything else. But what we've seen in the past is that it's been a route of medicalization from the get-go. These children have gone to Tavistock and will go to these clinics in the future with something in mind. And what they want is puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. If you ask them, they don't say they want to become comfortable in their bodies, because they don't see the way through that. They just see this as the silver bullet.
And this is why, even when, I read articles about this and they're talking about trans children, it's like, well, can we not call them trans children? They're children who have, issues with their bodies. If we already call them trans children from the beginning, then you're already sort of saying, well, that means they need the medication that affirms this transness. And this is why I was really disappointed in the CAS review that they used the term transgender female. And CAS, she did say at the start of the report, this is not about validating or invalidating, but by using the language, you're automatically validating a particular view. And we all know how important language is, especially in a subtle sort of way, pulling the wool over people's eyes. So, and she was in the House of Lords saying, some people will grow up to just be cisgender. And it's like, Hillary, please, come on.
The thing is, they wanted somebody who was neutral, and who couldn't be accused of being inclined one way or the other on this. And I think she is, to be honest. I think she did go into it with a relatively open mind. I mean, I met with her at one point and we had a discussion about this when she was carrying out the research for the report. But I think she tried at times to appease both sides, potentially sit on the fence a little bit with some of these things, as I say, possibly to avoid criticism. But actually, that didn't work, because
it never does.
And I published something the other day about one of the senior leaders in the British Psychological Society, the body that regulates psychologists in the NHS, and he was telling his team to essentially disregard the CAS review because she's quote unquote cisgender. CAS herself. So how can you please these people?
There was someone wrote an article saying this was an example of cis supremacy. And obviously they'll always find the reason. Now, what we learned from the CAS review was one of the main findings was that there was remarkably weak evidence, which I guess is now what they're using to say this is why we need to have a trial to fill in the gaps. But at the same time, it's still an experimental treatment. We know that it can negatively impact your bone density. We know that that doesn't necessarily recover. We also know, not just from the CAS review, but also from that early intervention study that the Tavistock JIDS did, which took them 9 years to publish. They only published that right after the judicial review that Kira Bell and Mrs. A brought, that it's a stepping stone. It's a ticket onto the trans train rather than a diagnostic tool that helps you have time to think. Let me just bring up what were some of the other key things. NCAS saying we've let children down. They were discouraging social transition. But basically, we don't know if they're safe, and we don't know which child will benefit. So given that information, do you think it's possible to have any form of clinical trial that would be ethical?
No, I don't. It is true there is a lack of research in this area. All the time that both here in the UK and abroad, they've been dishing out puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. We know it. This is one of the issues. There's been no transparency. There's been no proper follow-ups. There's been no recording of short, medium, and longer-term impact of this medication. But we know enough to know the damage that it causes around brain development, bone growth. When you look at the statistics of how many children who are put on puberty blockers progress onto cross-sex hormones, it demonstrates very clearly it's a slippery slope. Compared to children who are just left alone and or given explorative therapy, which provides very good desistance rates off the back of it. But for me, irrespective of the arguments for and against around specific symptoms, side effects, and all the rest of it, it comes down to, as a society, whether we want to be encouraging delusion or embracing reality. So on some level, if a child takes puberty blockers and they feel that and then cross-sex hormones, they say they've transitioned to the other sex and they said that they feel better in themselves for it, I don't really care, because they're not living in reality. And they've convinced themselves, and we've allowed them to be convinced of something that simply isn't true. And from a therapeutic perspective, human beings need to, if they want to truly flourish and, I guess, live life, need to embrace what's true and what's false rather than living in fantasy delusions. So I can't condone this medication, even if there weren't the awful side effects associated with it, because it's anti-therapeutic in my perspective. It's why I'm always banging on about the fact that we're not giving liposuction to anorexic patients, and we're not affirming people with split personality disorder and pretending that, yes, there are two people inside their head, and people who are convinced that they're the Messiah, we're not bowing down to them either and treating them as if, yes, they might be the Son of God. I mean, we don't affirm delusions in any other mental health presentation, but here, for some reason, we do. It doesn't make sense to me. It seems to fly in the face of good therapeutic ethics. Yeah, and this is a point that Dr. David Bell has also made, and others. Whatever happens in this field of medicine, it doesn't happen anywhere else. In terms of the suppression of information, the way things are greenlit, even at the Tavistock JIDS, where they pushed for this, when their own study hadn't even been published to justify it. And now, obviously, we know that there was all this pressure from ideological groups such as Mermaids, which is what swayed those decisions to change the age of when they were prescribed blockers and all these things. Then there's all the attempts to, with Sonia Appleby, the safeguarding lead, to stop her from doing her work. Dr. David Bell, they threatened him with disciplinary action. It's such a mess. This whole area is such a mess. That's why I'm like, with this puberty blocker trial, are they just trying to sort of make it look respectable, or is it just, hey, this is a way for us to continue the Dutch protocol? Yes, well, I'm trying to work out the rationale behind it as well. Either way, it's not good news for children or for society as a whole. And look, you're right, that it's a very, very messy landscape. Even if you're just focusing on the children, which is where I think our primary focus has to be, but increasingly of late, I'm thinking more and more about how we're dealing with adults for these issues as well. Yeah. And even in terms of the surgeries that people can get in this country on the NHS and through private health insurance schemes, it's crazy. In the United Kingdom, female genital mutilation, criminal offence. Even forms of extreme body modification are also criminal offences, even if people consent to them. If somebody goes to the doctor and for aesthetics or for whatever reason, they say they don't like one of their ears, they want it chopped off. And if a surgeon goes ahead and does that, that surgeon will be prosecuted and end up in prison. But here in the UK, you can mutilate people's genitals and it be okay. I think it's utterly backwards. So I'm starting to think about what we need to do as a society to criminalize forms of transitioning surgery for adults as well. Some people don't agree with me on that. They say you should let adults do whatever they want. The issue is children. Again, from a therapeutic perspective, I don't agree with that because we have a duty to protect our citizens, whether or not they're adults or children.
No, I'm fully with you on that one, because when people use the argument, but it makes them happy, but this is medicine. You know, we're not talking about having a facial at your local beauty salon. That could make you happy, whatever. But it's like there are things that we do that we want, but the point is, why do we want them? Which, you know, where you as a therapist come in. It's not just saying, oh, I want it, give it to me. That's consumerism. That's not medicine. And yeah, for me, it's the same. It's the first question would be, well, why are you? What do you think this is going to give you? And is it ethically? Should we, as you know, and as medical practitioners, should they go along with that? Should they just do it because somebody says, I want it, makes me happy? We don't measure medicine and the practice of medicine by happiness.
Well, to be honest, we shouldn't be. We seem to measure life generally too much in terms of happiness, and I also don't think that's a healthy way to look at things. Why? Because life is full of crap and uncertainty, and if the goal is to be happy forever, then you're going to end up, I think, sorely disappointed. So I with my clients, often it's working towards acceptance, actually, rather than happiness. Acceptance of what they're in control of, what they're not in control of, acceptance for the good things and the bad things as well, and to try and see it all as part and parcel of kind of the adventure of life. But these days, particularly with the coddling of children and wrapping them up in cotton wool, it seems that everything's geared towards happiness. And if a child's not happy, then there's something not right about that. It needs to be put right. It's not life. And this comes back to this notion of embracing what is real and what isn't. There's some people out there who don't, well, I think most people out there don't particularly like aging, right? And I think if you ask most middle-aged people, if they could snap their fingers and become teenagers again, I'm sure many of them would bite your hand off and say yes. But it's not, I mean, I'd love to go, I'm feeling pretty old now myself. I'd love to go back 10, 15 years. You can't do it. And even if we could do it, I mean, I guess you could say forms of cosmetic surgery are kind of an attempt to do that, but the people getting the cosmetic surgery, we don't tell them, yes, actually, when you have this facelift, we are actually taking 20 years off your life. It's all just...
And you don't change your birth certificate.
Correct.
Although there was a guy in the Netherlands and he tried to have it changed, but the council that he went to said no, because he said, I feel so much younger than I am. But he's like one of those personal development gurus, you know. In the 90s they got really big and he got massive in the Netherlands. You know, he made people walk over coals and burning coals and stupid stuff like that, you know. So I think it was just like a media stunt. But there was something that you said earlier about, well, there's two things there, I guess. One is this whole idea of I want it, therefore I should get it. It will make me happy, which is a very superficial way of looking at life. Give me what I want, it makes me happy. Secondly, we now have this whole culture where puberty blockers have been sold as the magic bullet. So all these kids that are confused are so focused now on just give me the meds, just give me the meds. And they're teaching each other what to say in order to get them. So how, as a therapist, can you even, like you said earlier, they don't come and say, oh, I want to accept my body as it is. No, they just want a ticket to the endocrinologist. So, and that presents a huge problem with this clinical trial, because they're basically saying that anyone who is now referred to those NHS gender services will be eligible to go on the trial if the doctors and the parents agree. So anyone could just go, I want those blockers, I want the blockers, and do the usual, I'll kill myself, blah, 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 blah. Again, the focus is on getting the medication, not on resolving the issues. Because how can they resolve the issues if they don't even acknowledge that there are issues? I'm trans, I need the medication.
Well, that's where the issue of recognizing this as an identity comes into it, because the narrative being pushed by campaign groups, corporations, even in school educational materials, is that this is an identity, not a mental health disorder or condition. And so they've attempted to kind of depathologize it, and therein lies the problem. Because in terms of, if I think about my own clients and who I've been able to work most effectively with in terms of moving towards a place of acceptance of themselves as they are, it's the ones who are able to say, I know I've got a mental health condition. Even if, and they still hate themselves, but the fact that they can recognize that it's not reality and that this is not natural, it makes all the difference. It's the ones who are essentially convinced that it's an identity and a choice. And with them, it's actually very, very difficult even to contemplate an alternative to transitioning. Ethically, it's my responsibility to explore what the causes of this discomfort might be, what options they've got going forward. Not willing to consider it. Risks, some of the clients I've seen over time, we talk about things like infertility, and they respond to me as if it's no big deal. Oh, it's okay, I can just freeze my eggs or sperm or whatever. They don't. Yeah. And that's the crazy thing in all of this, is that you would think from Cass and the proposals around the study that the more sure that these children are that they're in the wrong body, the more you should try and work towards giving them what they want in forms of transitioning. For me, it's the complete opposite. If a child is utterly convinced about something to the point that they're not willing to even listen to arguments against it, and they're completely blinded by this desire to achieve something, then they're not even willing to consider the serious ramifications for their future. That tells me they're not in a fit state to be making that kind of decision. I mean, they're being a child. So that I've got concerns about informed consent about this trial anyway. How can these children, who at the best of times can get hooked onto ideas and fads without thinking through the ramifications, and now they're children with a mental health condition, and we're expected to allow them to have say-so over whether they essentially take irreversible medication? It doesn't add up.
No, and then there's all the comorbidities that we now know so often come into play, whether they have other issues like depression, or whether they're on the autistic spectrum. Why it's so many girls now, why so many of these kids, for the ones that we have the data for, that, like, was it 2012, I think, up to 80% of them were same-sex attracted, and we still don't know why. We don't have those answers, and yet they want to plow ahead with this clinical trial. So initially it was announced, I think, August last year, that there would be a clinical trial. And I kind of went, they're just saying that, they're just saying that to appease the crazies. And it will never happen because it will never get the ethical approval. But then in February, they actually announced that there would be a clinical trial. And they still have to present it to, is it the Health Research Authority?
Yes.
They're going to then put together a research ethical committee of, I think it's up to 15 people. At least a third of them will be lay people, as in people who know nothing about this particular field. But Helen Joyce pointed out that all they can do is say it either meets ethical standards or it doesn't. They can't actually they don't change the way that they can't actually change the trial or have much influence on the trial. So is this trial going to look like?
Well, it's still relatively early days, and there's a lot of uncertainty around this. I mean, we've seen the kind of proposal, but it's not been given the authorization of the green light yet. I mean, the government have had opportunities to row back on this. We'll come on to myself and potential legal action in a bit, but even off the back of us writing to them and it being printed in the media, I guess they would have had an opportunity to reflect and reconsider, but they've chosen not to do that. They seem to be kind of ploughing on with it, which is worrying, which is why I think this is more likely they're not going to go ahead.
Yeah.
There's funding that's been made available. I think it's £11 million.
10.7 million pounds. And then I'm thinking, right, mental health services are on their knees. You could do so much in this particular field with that sort of money to go down the exploratory therapy approach. But, obviously the other side would claim that that's all conversion therapy.
Well, this is one of the points that myself and Kira Bell made in our kind of initial letter to the Health Research Authority, which is that why are there no other studies into other forms of treatment, less invasive, less risky treatments for gender dysphoria? Why aren't they doing a couple of year-long study on the benefits of therapy on this? Instead, they've skipped that and we're going straight into puberty blockers without actually doing research on things that are safer for children. That doesn't make any sense. That seems to be putting the cart before the horse. Surely you should work your way up with the least risky, least invasive methods and see how successful they are.
Right. Especially knowing that before the blockers came along, that worked pretty good.
Correct. So you're right. They've taken resources funding away from therapeutic inventions and put it into this. It's being run by King's College. Obviously, this is a big institute, but I've come across various things and I've written about various things they've put out over recent times, which caused me some concern. A couple of months ago, they appointed Yasmin Benoit, the asexual activist, as a research fellow on asexual, I don't know what. But anyway, that also concerned me and made me think, is this really an academic, rigorous institution, or is this just kind of a mouthpiece for certain ideologies? So I don't have any great deal of faith in King's College off the back of recent decisions they've made anyway. And then from the initial proposals I saw, there was going to be a follow-up period of, I think it was 2 years.
Yes.
That's not long enough, obviously, because we need to be looking at the medium and long-term impact of this, not just the short-term. We've had enough of these short-term studies. We need to be looking at the impact this is going to have over the course of a person's life, because the concern on our side is that you are setting this person up for irreversible regret and harm.
Yes.
So
not just from the blockers, but also from everything that follows from it, because we know that 98% goes on to then cross-sex hormones, or what some people call wrong sex hormones, and potentially surgeries. So any child that is now being referred to the gender services and then being told, oh, you might be the ideal candidate. I mean, it already sounds so dodgy when I say it. You, child, might just be the ideal candidate for this puberty blocker trial that we're conducting. How, and especially if you have a child that's so set on getting on the blockers, because culturally that's been pushed onto them so much, and that's what they tell each other. This is what you need, rather than I'm really depressed. What might be the cause of that? Where was I going with this?
Well, just something, as you were saying there, it got me thinking, because one of the arguments that's always put forward by the other side is that in order for puberty blockers to be as effective and as positive as they can be, you need to start children on them as young as possible, because they've already commenced puberty and gone through some of those changes, they'll be more difficult to reverse going forward. That's what they say anyway. That causes concerns in terms of how you're going to go about a trial here, even more so, because we were talking about informed consent earlier. And if you're starting from the position that you need to commence puberty blockers as young as possible, then again, I've got even greater concerns about whether or not these children have the capacity and the ability to truly consent to what they're doing. Because it's no use trialing puberty blockers on 16, 17-year-olds who one could argue are maybe, in a better position to make these kind of decisions. But we know that children are often seeking these interventions out 9, 10, 11 years old. So I reiterate what I said earlier, which is that even with all the safeguards, even with better boundaries, longer follow-up time, etc., etc. The mere fact that we're going to have a trial at all in and of itself is unethical.
Yes, I agree. Now they're calling it pathways, and it's due to this again. That sounds creepy, doesn't it? It's just a pathway to surgery and medication. It's due to run until January 2031. So apparently, that's the plan. As you said, it's going to be run by somebody called Emily Simonoff. She's head of child and adolescent psychiatry at King's College. They're saying that the aim is to track the physical, social, and emotional well-being of young people attending the NHS gender service clinics. And in contrast with the Tavistock GIDS early intervention study, subjects will also receive psychosocial support. Now, that's something that they did during that first study in the Netherlands when they first talked about the Dutch protocol there. But that meant that you couldn't separate the effects of the medication from the effects of the therapy. So, like, I'm not an expert, but it just sounds like, are they just setting themselves up to repeat all those mistakes of the past?
Those two things are not aligned. They are two completely different pathways that cannot cross. Going back to the example of, I don't know, like an eating disorder, one route which is equivalent to this, as I said, is offering like some form of liposuction. The other route is trying to get someone to a place where they recognize that how they feel about themselves isn't necessarily the truth, and try and get them to accept their body. You can't have both at the same time. It would be very bizarre in that example to give someone liposuction, but also try to get them to accept themselves. They're completely at odds with one another. So similarly here, there's very little point in dosing out puberty blockers, but also offering therapy at the same time. What are you offering the therapy towards? The whole point of the therapy should be trying to get people to a place where they can reconcile themselves with their bodies. If they're already changing their bodies through puberty blockers, it doesn't work.
You know what? A friend of mine, I found out last year, he's just put his son on blockers. We hadn't seen each other for a while, so I didn't know that was going on his end. And he didn't know what he didn't know what I've been doing for the last couple of years. But anyway, we met, and I met his son as well, who's 15. And as soon as he sent me a picture of the two of them the day before we met. And as soon as I saw the picture, I just thought, oh, please just let this be an awkward boy, slightly angelic, androgynous looking with really long hair. Let it just be that. But then it became clear very early on that it was more complicated than that. So they socially transitioned him for 2 years. Why? Because he got bullied relentlessly. And then he started saying, I'm a girl. So they socially transitioned him. That's why he had the long hair in the picture. But when I met him, his hair had been cut short. So he basically desisted, went back to his original name and he, him pronouns and that. And then I asked his dad, why did you cut his hair? I was like, well, he's a boy now. And I had my hair down and I just kept going, I'm a man, You're only reinforcing those very regressive ideas that boys can't have long hair. And he loves his long hair. So now he thinks he can only have long hair if he's a girl. Anyways, he's also autistic and self-harms. There's lots of issues. Anyways, when it was just the dad and I on just the two of us, I asked him, so what's happening now? He's in therapy. Okay, where? At the place where they invented the Dutch protocol, at that gender clinic. And what's the aim of the therapy? Well, for him to accept himself. Okay, I said, that sounds good. But, whatever happens, just keep him away from the drugs. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, well, just make sure they don't, he doesn't go onto the blockers. And I was like, oh, he just had his first injection 3 weeks ago. And I'm like, it's like what you're saying is you're saying, well, they can't actually go hand in hand, because how can you give someone therapy to learn to accept themselves if you're stopping their body from developing and showing the reality of their sex? It doesn't add up. So I'm trying to get this kid off these blockers.
It's Look, I struggle with it myself, because obviously some of the clients I'm working with, teenagers who are hell-bent on going down this path, and I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm not there to control them at the end of the day. That's not my job as a therapist. But the ideal outcome for any client, no matter what they're coming through with, is a place of acceptance, ideally contentment, and in the least invasive way possible. It doesn't matter what the presentation is. And so I feel powerless as well at times, and some of my clients will undoubtedly go on and transition irrespective of the therapy, and I think that's in part because of what they've absorbed around them in terms of media and education, all the rest of it. And it's so tough, because I know what damage this can cause, but there also comes a point in life in which you have to accept that people are going to make mistakes. This is why I want to create a system in which we don't even allow children the ability to make the mistake in the first place, because they're safeguarded from that. But when we're living in a world that we are, in the system in which we are, then unfortunately children are going to make mistakes. They're going to regret them. Some of these children now, teenagers who are transitioning, could well be the new faces of Stonewall and Mermaids tomorrow, and could be going on and essentially indoctrinating and recruiting other children. It's quite likely. I mean, that's how this whole kind of movement has evolved, really. So depending on who I'm engaging with, it moves from empathy and wanting to support them towards trying to safeguard other people that might be at risk because of them. It's like, when I look at some of the activists in Stonewall, for example, or even I saw a video they put out earlier in the week from one of their kind of mentors for children, trans person. And of course, I look at them and I feel an innate sense of sadness that they felt the need to go down this route and to mutilate themselves. And I do wonder whether they're truly happy. So I feel that as a human, but I also look at them as someone who is targeting and indoctrinating other children. And I can't stand either, irrespective of what they've been through. It doesn't excuse or justify what they're now doing. It's like this notion of people who are abused, for example, by their families when they were younger. We want to stop those people going on to become the abusers in the future. Strong language, but it's otherwise this is never going to end, because the next generation of indoctrinators.
It's almost like a pyramid scheme, isn't it? Because the more that they get on it, the more it affirms that they've done the right thing. And one thing I found really shocking about this friend of mine is they'd been on a waiting list for 2 years in the Netherlands to get on the blockers. And when they finally got an appointment for the first injection, the kid actually said, "I don't want it anymore." And then his dad said, "We've been on the list for 2 years. You're getting on the blockers." And I'm there meeting a friend I hadn't seen for 7 years. And I'm like, how on earth do I navigate this situation? How do I talk to him in a way that he's actually open to listening to me? He had never heard of the CAS review. He was completely unaware that in Sweden they've changed direction, in Finland, in Norway now, in Denmark. Even in the Netherlands, critical voices are now being voiced in the media and in politics. Worldwide, even in New Zealand, which is the country that's giving out the most puberty blockers, more than any other country, they're now going, "Oh, hang on, we need a review." So to go back to the trial, that is going to happen. It just looks like it's going to happen. We don't know anything about an age limit. There's been no talk of a control group. Again, it'd be really hard to have a control group for this unless you compare those who have therapy only with those who go on the blockers. But you couldn't have a double-blind randomized, control trial, because you can't fake not going through puberty. You either go through it or you don't. CAS has welcomed the trial. With Streeting has welcomed the trial. It's going to happen. Do you know anything about who's on the team? If there's any Tavistock JIDS people on the team?
I know very little, and this is one of the frustrations, to be honest. Even when we've written to the Health Research Authority, the response we got back was very much a kind of bog standard kind of copy and paste job. And I've seen responses they've sent to other people who've written in independently and raised their concerns, and it's the same kind of thing. So there's actually just not a great deal of information aside from what was announced with that recent pathways announcement. So we're just waiting for greater detail. But no, I don't know any great deal about any of the proposed team members involved.
Yeah, okie dokie. But you had an idea to stop this, and then you got together with Kira Bell. Tell me how that happened.
Well, after my own litigation, when I was kicked off my course all those years ago and fighting that for 3 years, I said I wasn't going to get back involved in litigation again, and then here I am once again. I can't seem to help myself, really. I wanted an opportunity to try and challenge us and stop it. As I said, if we have these trials and more children are harmed, then we've lost the battle as far as I'm concerned. And very pleased to find out that there were some lawyers willing to work on this, and that there was some funding in place to back it. And then word got around that Kira was interested, and it all moved pretty quickly. And we've said that we've got the team, we've got the funding, we'll do whatever we can to fight this all the way. It's still very, very early doors. I mean, our initial letter to the Health Research Authority was basically just requesting information because there's been a complete lack of transparency as to what's going on. But we have said to them that if they do press ahead with the trial, then we will try and bring a judicial review against them. So that's kind of been our promise in all of this. So we're waiting to see if that makes them rethink things slightly. But we've got the funding to take it all the way, and that includes through the various appellate courts as well. Like we won't stop until we either reach the end of the process or get a resolution that we want. I mean, Kira herself is involved in other litigation at the moment. She's involved in an ongoing judicial review about cross-sex hormones, and that's a bit further along than this case because they've actually commenced that judicial review, whereas we're at the very, very early stages of it. So, judicial reviews are very unpredictable. They can be expensive, time-consuming, and well, we've seen in the past, including in Kira's original case, that one court can decide one thing and then the higher court can decide the other. And so I'm trying not to get my hopes up. I'm trying not to make any promises to people other than the fact that we will fight it as far and as hard as we can. I hope that the government sees some sense and it doesn't need to come to it, but they don't seem to show any signs of letting up, unfortunately.
So what is the point where you would have to say, okay, that's it, we're going for the judicial review? And does that mean that any clinical trial that they have planned then automatically stops?
The point will be once the authorization, the green light has been given, and we have confirmation that this trial is happening. At the moment, as we said, it's a proposal.
Yeah.
But once there's been a decision, this is happening. That's at the point at which we would instigate the judicial review. I think that if there was a live judicial review taking place, I think it could well be that they temporarily kind of pause on it pending the outcome of that. But even so, I mean, once they've decided the trial's going ahead, there's still going to be quite a number of steps that they'll need to go through before you get to the point that children are actually being given this stuff. I mean, this is a pretty lengthy trial. So I think we're ready to go, basically, and press go on it as soon as we get the opportunity to do so. And look, Kira herself, I'm very pleased to be collaborating with her on this because she knows more than most the dangers of these puberty blockers, and she keeps putting herself out there time and time again. One could understand if she just wanted to kind of try and go back to some sense of normality and just live her life, but she wants to keep fighting this for the sake of other children, which is extremely heartwarming to see, and it's it's a privilege to be able to work alongside her on this.
Yeah, no, she's amazing. We spent a bit of time together earlier this year, and it's good to get to know her, because as a person, not just the detransitioner.
Correct. Yes, I think people have kind of viewed her almost through a microscope, like some sort of kind of specimen. She's always been held up as, yes, the detransitioner, and kind of almost representative of that entire group of people. And this is the problem with this ideology in general. It's like people actually lose their sense of self, and it becomes all about this and the identity in relation to whether or not they are trans, they were trans, have they transitioned, do they want to transition? It kind of takes over everything. Yeah. So yes, I think she does deserve some level of normalcy, but I'm happy that she's continuing to fight. And look, there are many other detransitioners who are also part of this fight back as well, and we need to hear their voices, and the public need to hear their voices, because they can speak firsthand as to the harm that's been caused to them.
And even with Kira, there's an issue where she's legally male, so she's legally, the law sees no difference between her and you and me, and she can't just, it's not like a marriage that can be annulled. So we had a chat. So I'm not sure if I got it all, understood it all right, but apparently for her to be legally considered female again, she would have to get a gender recognition certificate that says F. She can't undo the M, the gender recognition certificate that she has. She can't undo that. She would have to get a new one. And for that, she would have to prove that she's a man with gender dysphoria who wants to become female. So there's a whole other situation there.
Well, that just highlights, again, the madness of having this notion of illegal sex at all. It's a complete fantasy that's been kind of created. We need to get rid of the Gender Recognition Act. That needs to go. It's not going to go. I'm not sure whether any mainstream political party will be willing to sign up to a pledge on that at the moment. I can't see it. It needs to go.
I don't think so. And there was a petition. There's been a petition before that was rejected, and there was one that the government responded to, I think this week even, and they basically said it's fine as it is, safeguards here, safeguards there, blah blah blah. I don't think the political will is there to do it. I'm going to have a chat with Michael Foran, and also with another legal expert, Alessandra Asterti, because they have very different views on this. And I really want to get a good insight into, you can say, oh, repeal the GRA, but that's not going to sort this whole mess out, because gender reassignment was already acknowledged in law before that came along, because of some other judgment that became case law. And then there's the international situations and obligations that the UK has. So those are other conversations. But it's good to see that there has been very vocal pushback against this particular clinical trial that's being proposed. Kemi Badenoch spoke out against it. She said it's hard to believe there could ever be an ethical way of trialing these irreversible drugs for this purpose. Mm-hmm. Dr. David Bell's been on the case. He's written articles about it, done interviews. Bayswater Support Group, Our Duty, Transgender Trends, GenSpect. I don't know. I'm sure LGBT Alliance has put something out about it. I can't remember off the top of my head. Gay Men's Network. I mean, as soon as we have the details, then we'll be getting on the case as well. Because again, as a gay man, so many of these kids are struggling with being gay or lesbian, but they don't even know that that's what they're struggling with, because, you need some good therapy for that to uncover all these things.
There's a lot going on. I mean, even just on your last point there, this Labour government is still pushing forward with this conversion therapy ban, which is like, this is what concerns me about this government, because we could end up in a stage not so far down the line in which children are still on puberty blockers, but are also essentially being prohibited from receiving ethical explorative therapy, which of course will be the worst of both worlds. So I'm worried about that. I think in some ways, I think there's greater chance to get the government to row back on the puberty blockers than the conversion therapy. But they've been talking about this, and they pledged it for years before they got into government. It's been something that the Conservative government were going back and forth with, doing multiple U-turns on. It's such a contentious area. I hear more and more the politicians view it as kind of trying to appease the kind of gender ideologues, to kind of throw them a scrap of meat or keep them happy. But they're not appreciating the serious ramifications of this legislation. We've seen it elsewhere in other jurisdictions where it's been similar laws been brought in. So that's going to be another fight on our hands once the wording of that has been published.
Yes, and even if they put something out just to try and appease the other side, the danger is that something is then in place that can be altered down the line and then be broadened, or And last weekend I was in Aberdeen, facing the mob, a whole bunch of, I think there's over 250 of them, just angry, screaming. Flipping the bird at us, and just, there was no way that you could talk to them. And I'm like, why would you try to appease that type of group? For what? And I wish that, like, I've been involved in this for about 5 years. I wish I had something more eloquent and insightful to say than they're just nuts. So many of them. They're nuts or lost, and I don't blame these youngsters these days that have been spoon-fed this stuff everywhere in schools, through the media, TV shows, shows like Euphoria, or wherever you go, it's there. That's why I often think if I was a 13-year-old today, I'd definitely be knocking on the gender clinic's door, which is a reason to keep pushing back. Well, because we're older now. We're older, so we know, we can see why it was that we struggled with things when we were younger. We can look back and see, okay, it took time to resolve these things, sometimes decades.
For sure. And then this goes back to what we were saying earlier about also trying to put ourselves in their shoes and empathize with them. And that's why when I look at some crazy rabble flipping the bird and shouting abuse, outside conferences that I've attended or whatever, I may feel some degree of frustration, even resentment towards those people and the way they're carrying on. But my greatest deal of frustration and resentment is towards the leaders, the businessmen, the politicians, the educators who allowed this to happen under their watch in our society, because they've created this monster. The actual kind of activists on the front line are kind of just pawns in all of this. And as you say, some of them are confused, some of them are mentally unwell, whatever. So I will always reserve my greatest anger towards those people who had a duty of care and responsibility, and have completely let it go in pursuit of praise or profit or whatever. And that's why I continue to want to see justice. And some people don't agree with me on this, but there needs to be some reconciling of what's gone on. There needs to be some punishment for those who have done this. Surgeons who are out there willing to mutilate young people's bodies in this way, they don't deserve to be on the medical register. It flies in the face of the Hippocratic Oath, which is the governing principle of the medical profession. They don't deserve to have that job and that title. And that's just one example. And similarly with the teachers pushing this stuff on the vulnerable students. So I won't be satisfied until justice has been served for the harms that have been committed in the past. So forget about new children being harmed. I want justice for the thousands who have already been irreparably damaged.
And that's another point, I think there were 9,000 children.
What happened to the 9,000 children who were treated by gender identity services between 2009 and 2020?
You could set aside budget to follow all of them up, because there's so much follow-up that hasn't been done. Look at the ones that went on to adult services and the ones who didn't, and follow all of them up and do a study and use something, I think they call it retrospective recruitment. Get the information from them, because if we want to know about long-term impact, we've got the people there. We just have to find them and then do the research and go with the guinea pigs that have already been have already gone through the process rather than add more guinea pigs onto it. Maybe that's too logical.
Why don't you pitch it? How about you write to Wes Streeting and suggest that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but that's how we change things. It's like you said, you have a plan for a judicial review. It might not stop the trial, but it could limit the number of kids who go onto it.
We've all got to do what feels right for ourselves and what helps us to sleep at night, to be honest. Even if we don't win ultimately, the mere fact that we can say to ourselves that we've stood up for what we feel is right and for children's welfare and all the rest of it, even if it feels like the odds are stacked against us at times, you've got to keep fighting for our own sanity as much as anything else. Because I don't know about you, but I became so aware of what was going on in this space that had I not tried to do something about it, I couldn't really live with myself. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror because I would know that I was going along with this just for an easy life.
And you got a big mirror behind you, so there's no getting away from it. No, I'm the same. Look, I got to a point where I started looking into it, and then I just think something's horribly wrong. But I still took a year to inform myself because I wanted to know what I was talking about. And like so many others, I just thought, am I missing something? Am I crazy? Am I being judgmental and bigoted? And then after a year, I was just like, I have to say something. Come on. And 5 years later, here we are. And someone like Sue Evans, she rang the alarm about this in 2004.
Crazy.
That's 21 years ago. And if you look at all the work that Transgender Trend has done to stop this madness, and LGBT Alliance and so many others, and so thank you.
I was fairly late to the game, to be honest. I'll blame my age on it, and then I'll say that I was a youthful immaturity or something. But you're right. People have been fighting this for a hell of a long time. And that's why it's good to see that some of those stalwarts are kind of starting to get the credit that they deserve.
Yeah.
Even Stephanie Davis-Arai and things like that, in terms of her kind of recognition to the honours list. Like it's good to see. But now, as you say, there's so many organisations out there coming at this from different angles, whether it's from the sexuality perspective, whether it's from the child safeguarding, the women's rights. It's become a very, very broad church, and that's good. That's exactly what we need. So I still believe that we can get there eventually, and I think common sense, reality, public opinion are with us on this. We just need to, I guess, convince those who have got the power. And if we can convince them, then put people in power who are willing to listen to common sense, reality, and public opinion.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a good note to finish on, because it gives us reasons to be optimistic.
I think so. I think so. My natural inclination is to be pessimistic, but I'm trying to remain positive on this, and I do. I think we'll get there.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this chat.
Pleasure.
And thank you everyone for watching. Once we know that the trial is definitely going ahead and you're going to push the button on triggering the judicial review, let me know, and then I'll share all the details so people can get involved.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Manu.
And ciao, everyone. Bye. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my PayPal and Patreon supporters. Because of you, I can make videos like this. Special shout out to my big spenders. Help Her Open, Mama Turv and the Turventines, me Julie, the lovely Mary, Julia, Dusty, Judels, Leffy, Dorothy, Wildfire, Esther, and Martha. Thank you.